Imagine standing alone on a dust-choked trail that snakes through the Sierra Nevada foothills. The last gold-digging towns half collapsed around you. The sun bleeds crimson against the jagged peaks, and a brittle wind rattles through the charred remains of a long-forgotten saloon sign, "Whiskey and Revelry since 1851. Suddenly, a low whistle cuts through the hush. No bird, no branch, just a sound that seems almost human, almost pleading. You turn, and for the briefest breath, a silhouette stands by the doorframe. A man in a battered hat, revolver dangling at his hip, eyes dark as pitch. Then he's gone. Now shift your mind 1,500 miles east to the ghosted plains of Texas Hill Country. Here, the land itself seems to mourn, scarred by ancient cattle drives and blood-soaked duels under open skies. Locals whisper of outlaws who never quite left, who still ride under the ghost moon, spurs jangling across eternity. But who truly haunts these lands more? The prospectors driven mad by gold fever in California, or the trigger-happy desperados of Texas who carved their legacies in gunfire? And more chilling, whose spirits still dare to walk among us today? California, the gold rush fever. In 1848, the sleepy Californian outpost of Coloma exploded into legend when James Marshall discovered shimmering flakes of gold in the American River. Within months, tens of thousands surged into the region, chasing fortune like hounds on a blood trail. They came from Chile, China, Ireland, Germany, and across the battered, war-torn states of early America. The camps were a babel of tongues and tempers, bursting with cheap whiskey, foul sweat, gun oil, and the metallic tang of greed. Many found nothing but rock and heartbreak. As desperation mounted, so did violence. Claims were stolen under the barrel of a Colt. Bodies found floating face down in shallow streams, pockets cut clean. Some said the ground itself grew hungry, swallowing men whole in sudden cave-ins. Superstition took root like mold. Miners would refuse to work certain creeks said to be cursed by the spirits of those who died clutching empty pans. By the 1850s, ghost stories were as common as gold pans. Miners swore by candlelight they heard phantom picks clinking in abandoned shafts. Others claimed to see skeletal figures, dressed in the tattered coats of 49ers, drifting between pine trunks at dusk, forever searching for the mother lode that never came. Texas, the Wild West outlaws. Meanwhile in Texas, a different fever burned, one for lawlessness and survival on an unforgiving frontier. By the 1860s, Texas was a hotbed for outlaws, desperados, and vigilante justice. Towns like Bandera and Fredericksburg became notorious stopovers where blood often soaked the dust before high noon. Gunslingers like Clay Matthews, rumored to have killed 20 men over poker debts, stalked the dance halls. Local lore says he carved notches into a church door for each soul he claimed, a macabre tally that locals still whisper about when the wind howls down empty streets. Entire families were sometimes massacred in range wars over grazing land. Lynch mobs left bodies swaying from gnarled oak branches, boots barely brushing the ground. When dusk settled in Texas, doors were barred, lamps doused low. Folks learned quick. After dark, the only thing on the wind was death. Developing the mystery, witnesses and strange events in the ghost towns of California. Over in Bodie, California, perhaps the most infamous ghost town of them all, stories refused to die. A former park ranger named Samuel Ortega recounted in a 1989 oral history that one evening, while locking up the old assay office, he glimpsed two men inside, hunched over a scale. They wore battered bowler hats and dusty waistcoats, murmuring in words he couldn't catch. When he opened the door fully, the room was empty, air cold as an icehouse. He later found faint footprints in the dust, leading nowhere. Even today, visitors to Bodie often return to their cars to find fresh handprints smeared across dusty windows, though no one stood near. Cameras malfunction, batteries drain in moments, and tour guides speak of a curse of body. Anyone who steals so much as a nail from the site finds themselves hounded by misfortune until the item is returned. On the blood plains of Texas, Texas has its own chilling testimonials. In 2003, a freelance photographer named Grace Levin set up along a lonely stretch near Uvalde, hoping to capture the Milky Way. Through her long exposure, she noticed streaks of light, like lanterns swinging back and forth. When she checked the frames, shadowy figures on horseback emerged. No saddles, no gear, just gaunt silhouettes with empty eye sockets. she told a local rancher the next morning. He only nodded and said, "They've been riding this trail long before my grandpappy's time. Best to leave 'em be." Another tale surfaces from the bar at Luckenbach, where an aging fiddler named Royce claimed he once played for a ghost audience. It was near closing time. Place was empty. I felt this hush, like the whole air got heavy. Then a cold swept over my boots and I heard applause. But I was alone. I swear I was. Connection to the present, how these legends still haunt us. And so we're left with an unsettling question. Why do these stories cling so fiercely to California and Texas? Perhaps because both states wear their past like a tattered badge. Neon signs buzz atop the bones of saloons. Modern highways snake over trails once darkened by outlaw hooves. You see it in pop culture endlessly. Shows like Deadwood or Godless resurrect the raw grit of these eras, while countless horror films set in abandoned mining camps milk the terror of ghostly miners emerging from shafts. Even video games like Red Dead Redemption pepper eerie encounters with spectral riders that seem ripped from Texas legend. Tourists flock year-round to Bodie, to Calico, to the haunted hotels of Fredericksburg, hoping for a glimpse of the unexplainable. Ghost tours rake in thousands each month, their guides spinning stories that may be more real than we dare admit. Every October, these places explode with themed festivals. In California, miners' dances are recreated under strings of lanterns, while in Texas, cowboy shootout reenactments often end with a ghost walk through cemetery plots lit by candlelight, a strange communion of past and present, where laughter mingles with uneasy glances over shoulders. So here we stand, caught between two haunted legacies, the greed-crazed miners of California and the trigger-happy outlaws of Texas. Both left scars not just on the land, but perhaps on time itself. Maybe that's why, even now, on certain nights when the moon cuts just right, people claim to see shadows that don't quite belong to this century. But who's more restless? Who lingers longer among us, reaching out through the veil for reasons we may never understand? That's exactly what we'll keep exploring in the next part of this journey, diving deeper into the personal diaries, lost letters, and chilling artifacts that might finally reveal why some spirits simply refuse to rest. What did you think of this first chapter? Was there any part that gave you chills or made you curious for more? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to know which side of this haunted coin fascinates you more. Also, if you're enjoying uncovering these lost stories with me, consider subscribing so you won't miss when we dig even deeper in the next block. It begins with a scrap of paper, torn from a ledger dated 1872, found under the floorboards of an abandoned saloon in Mariposa County. The handwriting is hurried, the ink rust brown from age and perhaps something darker. It reads, "They come at dusk, faces hollow, eyes shining like coins. I tried to shut the doors, but the gold, God help me, the gold wouldn't let me." No signature, no further explanation. Just that single ragged confession, tucked away where perhaps no one was ever meant to find it. Yet it sits now under glass in a small county museum, surrounded by rusted pickaxes and frayed leather pouches. Locals say it's cursed. The curator only smirks when asked, but he never quite meets your eyes. Meanwhile, nearly 1,000 miles across arid lands, a widow in Mason, Texas keeps a locked trunk in her attic. Inside are neatly folded children's clothes that no longer smell of soap or skin. Beneath them rests a blood-stained handkerchief and a small pistol, wrapped carefully as though it might still burn to the touch. She's never opened it in 30 years, though some nights she swears she hears tiny feet on the stairs and a soft giggle that tightens her chest until she can't breathe. This is how these stories fester, not in broad strokes or grand monuments, but in tiny forgotten corners, scraps of memory, sighs that echo down hallways long after the living have moved on. And it is here, in these uneasy silences, that the question grows sharp as a knife. Are these simply scars left by tragedy? Or is there something far more deliberate at work? Are we the ones haunting these places with our need for answers? Or do the dead truly linger, reluctant to loosen their grip? The deeper you delve into the folklore of the California gold fields, the more tangled the threads become. Diaries speak of miners who sat up suddenly in their sleep, raving about shadowy men standing by their bunks. One entry from 1856 mentions a man who woke nightly to find his boots moved to the foot of another's bed. He accused his bunkmates. They laughed, swore innocence. On the fourth morning, He found muddy prints leading from his bed straight out the cabin door and across the frost-bitten ground, prints that ended abruptly halfway to the tree line, as if whoever made them simply ceased to exist. In Texas, the legends turn even more personal, often tied to family lines. There are whispered curses that pass from father to son, mother to daughter. In Llano, a middle-aged rancher named Jeb once showed an old map to a visiting historian. The parchment was brittle, sketched with erratic lines and cryptic marks. Jeb claimed it was drawn by his great-great-grandfather, who helped run cattle up the Chisholm Trail. Each tiny X on the page was supposedly a site where someone fell, shot, stabbed, or simply vanished. The historian dismissed it as tall tales. Weeks later, the man's car was found abandoned outside Kerrville, driver's door hanging open, keys still in the ignition. His body was never recovered. It's a pattern that repeats itself. Skeptics come to debunk the stories, to peel away the superstition and show only dust and echoes. But sometimes the ones most eager to scoff are the first to slip through cracks we cannot see. Take the case of Elizabeth Moreland, a folklorist from San Francisco. In 1994, she spent 3 months living among the ruins of Empire City, once a booming mining town, now little more than stone foundations and tangled manzanita. She wanted to catalog the ghost tales, lay them bare in a thesis. Her notes are meticulous for the first 6 weeks, brimming with interviews of old ranch hands and local teenagers who dared each other to camp by the crumbling assay office. Then the entries grow sparse, increasingly erratic. Short, jagged lines appear between paragraphs. By the final page, her handwriting is an unreadable scrawl, looping over itself again and again around a single word. Listen. She was found wandering a highway 40 miles away, barefoot, her skin laced with scratches, as if she'd run through thickets blind. She never spoke of her experience again. If California's phantoms rise from greed and betrayal, Texas's seem born of raw violence, each bullet and blade leaving behind a hungry echo. Sheriff's ledgers from the 1870s list dozens of men, wanted dead or alive, many of whom simply disappeared between towns, never to stand trial or face a rope. Their families sometimes claim to see them years later, standing at the edge of campfires, silent and unblinking until the flames guttered and died. There's an old cemetery outside Castroville, overgrown with weeds and brush. Locals avoid it, not out of superstition exactly, but a kind of quiet respect. Among the leaning headstones is a stone too weather-worn to read, but on certain nights, particularly close to the anniversary of the town's founding, people say you can see a man kneeling there, hat in hand. If approached, he lifts his head, revealing a grin too wide for his face, eyes black as the night around him. Then he vanishes, leaving only the impression of boots pressed into the dirt. Modern life rushes by these places without slowing. SUVs speed past on new highways that cut through old stagecoach routes. Neon billboards advertise slot machines and barbecue platters a stone's throw from where men once dueled at dawn. Yet underneath all this hum of progress, the land keeps its secrets close. Sometimes, late at night, a ranch dog will sit up and stare into the distance, ears cocked to a sound no human can hear. Sometimes a miner's shack long collapsed will seem, for just a heartbeat, to glow from within, as if lantern light still dances there. And always there are those who seek out these places, drawn by something they can't quite name. Paranormal investigators with thermal cameras, amateur thrill seekers hoping to catch an EVP of a gunshot that never ends. They arrive full of excitement, but more often than not, they leave shaken, hollow-eyed. Not because they proved anything, but because they felt watched in a way that leaves fingerprints on the soul. Hollywood, of course, can't resist these veins of unease. Entire genres have grown fat on the legends of the West. Spaghetti westerns dripping with moral ambiguity. Horror films where miners claw from shallow graves. Prestige series that treat outlaws like flawed gods. Even comedies riff on the idea, poking fun at haunted saloons and spectral card games that never quite fold. Yet there's something different when you stand there yourself. When you step out of your car in the dead silence of a Texas pasture or the brittle hush of a California mining trail, the laughter dies. The jokes fade because the air feels heavier, electric, waiting. You wonder who else might be standing just beyond your reach, breath cold on your neck. It is this tension between myth and reality, between entertainment and the raw pulse of dread, that keeps these stories alive. They thrive because they remain unsolved, unmeasured by science or swept away by new asphalt. Each retelling invites us to lean closer, to peer over the ledge into darkness, hoping we might glimpse something that proves we're not alone, or that we are. And that's even worse. A rancher in Junction once told a reporter that his grandfather woke nightly to see figures gathered at the edge of their fields. Not men exactly, but shapes draped in dusters and wide-brimmed hats, heads lowered as if in silent council. When approached, they simply faded, leaving the smell of sweat and gunpowder lingering long after. In Auburn, California, a bartender at a restored Gold Rush saloon swears that every January, during the town's commemorative festival, they lose cases of liquor to mysterious breakages. Bottles shatter in locked storage rooms. Mirrors fog with handprints that match no living patron. She says she's given up trying to rationalize it. They were here first, she shrugs. Maybe they still think it's theirs. But perhaps the most unsettling accounts come not from dusty archives or trembling witnesses, but from small, quiet places, like a child's bedroom. In Fredericksburg, a mother named Claire bought her daughter a toy revolver at a local antique shop, thinking it a quaint nod to Texas heritage. That night, her daughter woke screaming. She claimed a man with a face all melted tried to take it from her. They found the toy gun on the floor the next morning, barrel warm to the touch despite the winter chill. Even skeptics begin to falter under the weight of so many tiny horrors. Each story on its own is easy to dismiss. Together they weave a tapestry too intricate, too consistent to ignore. A tapestry that stretches from the blood-streaked saloons of the Sierra foothills to the sun-blasted trails of the Texas interior, linking greed, violence, and something else, something that refuses to be buried. And this is what gnaws at us most. The thought that maybe the dead don't linger out of vengeance or unfinished business. Maybe they stay because they're compelled by the very land that shaped them. Maybe they're as trapped here as we are, unable to outrun the gravity of a place soaked in stories, in blood, in gold. So whose spirits still roam more fiercely? The desperate miners who died clutching fool's treasure in California, or the outlaws who lived and killed by cold steel in Texas? Which legacy breathes hardest down your neck when the lanterns gutter low? It's a question without comfort, without finality, the sort that worms into your thoughts on long drives through empty country, making you glance at rearview mirrors too often. Next, we'll push even deeper, turning over diaries that were never meant to be found, exploring lost trails only spoken of in hushed family legends. We'll uncover relics still stained with old sins, and perhaps, just perhaps, find ourselves staring into the same shadows that once made hardened men tremble. Tell me, what's haunting you more so far? The ghost miners clawing through cold shafts in California, or the hollow-eyed gunslingers of Texas who still seem to ride by moonlight? Let me know in the comments. And if you want to keep chasing these dark footprints with me, subscribe so you won't miss the next descent. It starts with the journal of a woman named Ada Hensley, recovered from the blackened ruins of her family homestead near Angels Camp, California, sometime around 1867. The first pages are sunlit and innocent, brimming with hopeful lines about sweet air off the pines and the promise of gold to build our futures. But by the middle entries, something sour seeps through. She writes of her husband, Charles, wandering from bed each night, mumbling about voices in the mine calling him by name. She records finding muddy footprints across their parlor floor come morning, though Charles insisted he never left their room. Then the words grow erratic, margins crowded with desperate little drawings, twisted faces, hollow sockets, long fingers reaching from darkness. The final page is a single smudged handprint, dark as dried blood. That journal was locked away in a private collection for nearly a century. It surfaced only recently when an estate auction in Sacramento accidentally listed it among old ranch ledgers. A local historian bought it for a song, unaware of the horror it held. 2 weeks later, neighbors found him dead at his desk, eyes wide open, mouth slack, as if frozen mid-scream. No signs of struggle, no cause the coroner could name. The journal had vanished from his home. Meanwhile, stories from Texas often come wrapped in family shame. Secrets so tangled in blood and inheritance that speaking them aloud is said to summon ruin. Near the town of Menard, an old man named Amos kept to himself on a small spread of rocky pasture. Locals regarded him as harmless if peculiar. He spoke to empty air, left food offerings at fence posts. It was only after his death that the true extent of his isolation was understood. A nephew clearing out Amos's cabin found dozens of crude wooden effigies tucked into drawers, closets, even beneath floorboards. Each figure was marked with symbols burned deep into the wood, and each had a tiny scrap of faded cloth pinned to its chest. Baby bonnets, kerchiefs, fragments of sun-bleached dresses. The sheriff ordered them destroyed. Within weeks, 3 members of the cleanup crew were dead from accidents so grotesque they hardly seemed accidents at all. It raises a question most would rather choke down than voice. What if these places don't merely echo with the past? What if they feed on remembrance, fatten on fear, growing hungrier the more we prod them? Maybe some histories aren't content to lie quiet in yellowed documents. Maybe they demand performance, insist on reenactment, each generation forced to offer fresh hearts to old hungers. Take the curious case of the Lawton brothers. In the spring of 1883, Thomas and Elijah Lawton left San Francisco with a plan to buy into a quartz operation outside Nevada City. What survived of Thomas's letters painted a bright picture. Easy money, hearty meals, nights spent by roaring fires swapping stories with other hopeful men. Then, abruptly, the letters stopped. No final word home, no returned bodies. Only a rumor trickled back. A tale of 2 strangers seen wandering outside town stark naked, eyes rolling white, muttering nonsense until they bolted into the forest and were lost. A tattered mining report from later that year briefly notes an incident of unusual delirium among transient laborers, offering no details beyond the cold bureaucratic phrase. The forest still stands where they fled, thick with pine and madrone, the underbrush swallowing trails whole. Hikers occasionally go missing there even now. Park rangers attribute it to poor preparation, to the ease with which one can get turned around among identical trees. But certain old-timers shake their heads, muttering about the Laughing Grove, where strange voices rise with the wind, and sometimes the wind itself seems to pull at your clothes, guiding you deeper. Texas holds its own grim dossiers. In 1910, a traveling preacher named Josiah Kern set up revival tents across small towns west of Austin. His sermons thundered with fire and condemnation, promising redemption for coins dropped into his collection plates. Then came the night in Llano when he pitched his tent near an abandoned stage stop. Townspeople who attended described a strange atmosphere, air so still it seemed to squeeze their lungs. As Kern began to preach, he faltered, gripping the pulpit as if something unseen clutched at his throat. Witnesses claimed the lanterns guttered blue. Kern screamed then, pointing into the crowd, swearing he saw men with faces rotted down to bone. His words dissolved into babble. By morning he was found outside the tent, collapsed in dust, eyes burned near black. The local paper ran the story for 2 days before moving on to happier news of a county fair. But the tent was left to rot in the sun, its canvas rippling as if something paced within. Why do these terrors endure when so much else from the era has faded? Railroad towns vanish, cattle routes shift, mines choke with dust. Yet these stories cling tight, refusing to be pried away by time's relentless claw, perhaps because they have hosts, willing or not. Each frightened child who whispers of a shadow at their window, each drunk who insists he saw someone step into the road only to melt into mist, becomes another vessel, another lantern by which these phantoms keep themselves lit. Even today, it's hard to separate the myth from the marrow. Look at the annual Gold Rush Days Festival in Placerville. Cheerful tourists sip craft beer and take selfies with actors dressed as prospectors, never realizing they stand feet from sites where men once bled out over poker hands. During the closing parade last year, multiple onlookers reported seeing someone in old miner's garb shuffling against the flow, face obscured by a broad hat. When approached by security to clear the route, he simply wasn't there anymore. Some wrote it off as a prank. Others still wake sweating, swearing they dreamt of him standing at the foot of their beds, dripping water from an unseen wound. In Texas, Ghost tours of San Antonio's older districts promise chills in exchange for ticket fees. Guides spin stories beneath gas lamps, point out bullet pocks in limestone walls, lead groups through alleys where echoes seem to come from mouths long gone. But more than one visitor has left pale and shaking, claiming the alley pressed too close, as if stone itself strained to listen. A woman from Corpus Christi posted online about her tour, saying that halfway through she felt a small hand slip into hers. She assumed it was a child from another family until she looked down and saw nothing. Her hand stayed cold the entire drive home. The intrusion of these histories into modern life grows more unsettling the more you look for it. A maintenance crew resurfacing an old road outside Georgetown unearthed a cluster of skeletons in shallow graves. Not so strange for a state riddled with frontier violence. What disturbed them was the pattern. Each skull faced the same direction, mouths stretched in grotesque mirth as if grinning at some final private joke. Work halted for months. When it resumed, 2 crew members refused to return, claiming nightmares in which they joined that buried audience, lying flat under dirt with laughter bubbling from their own throats. California's mines, even long abandoned, seemed to breathe after dark. A university research team once placed motion-sensitive cameras near a series of collapsed shafts outside Sonora. They hoped to monitor wildlife reclaiming human ruin. The footage they collected never aired. Though it showed foxes, raccoons, even the occasional wandering dog, it also caught brief frames of figures standing inside the broken mouths of tunnels. Figures that did not register on heat sensors. Figures that didn't move until they did, blurring from one side of the frame to the other in a fraction of a second, with no corresponding rustle of undergrowth or displaced dust. The lead researcher resigned shortly after. What are these places trying to tell us? Or perhaps a more chilling thought, what do they want us to carry back? Every retelling acts like a blood transfusion, pumping vitality into their half-dead veins. Each person who drives a lonely stretch of Highway 281 and finds themselves gripping the wheel tighter without knowing why adds another thin layer to stories that never really needed our permission to grow. There's something almost seductive in that fear. Why else do we keep poking the bruise, gathering under darkening skies to hear tales that might strip sleep from our nights? Because maybe part of us longs for proof that death isn't a locked door, that even if it comes with screaming, it comes with continuance, that some essence remains to wander roads, haunt homes, leave handprints on fogged glass, even if that essence is hungry, cold, hollow of mercy. So who haunts more fiercely? The men who tore into California's hillsides with iron and dynamite, driven mad by glints of false promise? Or the Texans who left their mark in splintered doors and sun-bleached gallows, who learned early that law was often just another man's gun barrel? Perhaps it doesn't matter. Perhaps it's not a contest. Maybe it's a marriage. Gold and gunpowder, greed and blood, forever binding these 2 frontiers in a restless, rattling union. And you, standing here now in the flickering light of these stories, have become part of that union. Your heartbeat a new drum on old earth. Your breath another offering to places that never truly emptied. In the next chapter, we'll slip even deeper, pulling back rotten curtains to expose diaries written by men already half gone, letters that should never have been mailed, and relics that still whisper under museum glass. We'll trace footsteps across graves that locals pretend not to notice, and we may find ourselves wondering, if these spirits still roam so easily through their old worlds, what keeps them from stepping fully into ours? There is a trunk locked away in a museum vault in Sacramento, lacquer peeling, brass fittings green with corrosion. It was retrieved from the burnt shell of a boarding house that once served as refuge for men driven half-mad by the promise of gold. Inside the trunk lie bundles of letters, tied with string so fragile it threatens to dissolve at a touch. Few have dared read them all. Those who did often emerged pale, pressing handkerchiefs to trembling lips, as if some taste of ash or rot clung stubbornly to their tongues. Among these papers is a letter dated March 12, 1854, written by a man who signed only Ephraim. The ink has faded to a dull bruise, the pen strokes wavering. He writes of working a claim by Lantern Creek with 2 others, men he knew only as Hatch and Boone. For weeks they found nothing but shattered stone. Then one afternoon, Boone struck something that wasn't quartz or granite. He dug it out with careful, almost reverent hands, a figurine carved from dark wood, smoothed by time until it gleamed like oiled skin. Ephraim's letter grows disjointed after that, the grammar fraying. He speaks of Boone laughing in the dark, of Hatch waking to find Boone crouched over him, whispering syllables that weren't English. Then silence. The last lines scrawl down the page. I hear them at night, voices low, greedy, not men. If we feed them Boone, will they go? The letter ends abruptly. No signature, no farewell, only a blot where ink dripped, like a tear that fell too late. Ephraim, Hatch, Boone. Their names appear nowhere else in official ledgers. Their claim at Lantern Creek was abandoned, overrun by brambles. The shaft collapsed in on itself as if the earth hurried to swallow any trace. Texas keeps its own relics locked away, hidden behind county clerk doors or rusting in personal collections passed from reluctant hand to hand. In Gillespie County, an old family Bible was discovered at an estate sale, its leather warped, pages bloated with damp. Sandwiched among brittle genealogies was a single sheet of notepaper, written in tight slanting lines by someone named Miriam. She describes waking on the eve of her wedding to find her betrothed, Caleb, standing naked in the moonlight beyond her window. His body was rigid, arms outstretched, mouth open as if screaming, though no sound escaped. When she rushed outside, he was gone. They found Caleb the next morning dangling from a live oak, skin bruised in wide handprints too large to be human. Miriam's writing ends with a plea scrawled repeatedly down the margins. Please don't let them take me too. This is how these stories metastasize. Each found letter or journal becomes another artery feeding the dark heart that pulses beneath both these territories. The more we pry open these private agonies, the more we seem to invite their authors to linger, to slip between our own walls, our own fragile hours before dawn. In Nevada City, there's a hotel that prides itself on authentic gold rush ambiance. Guests pay extra for rooms with original clawfoot tubs and antique furniture. What they're not told is that twice in the last decade, visitors have awoken to find water running from dry faucets, pooling crimson on the tile. Management writes it off as plumbing rust, though plumbers have never found a single corroded pipe. Guests typically check out early. Their excuse is awkward, strained, urgent meetings, sudden illnesses, eyes skittering from the shadows that gather near door frames. In Fredericksburg, Texas, a property once belonging to an infamous cattle baron has changed hands many times. Its fields are lush, the stone house charming in photographs, yet no one stays longer than a few months. Realtors whisper of unexplained damage, windows spider-webbed from inside, nails worked loose in patterns that seem less like settling and more like clawing. Children who lived there speak decades later of a man they called Mr. Gray, who would squat by their bedsides at night and hum songs without melody, breath stinking of wet earth. What draws these echoes to linger? Perhaps it's the violence that fertilized the soil so thoroughly. In California, mining towns built on stolen Miwok and Nisenan land quickly overflowed with men who saw each other not as neighbors, but as obstacles between themselves and fortune. Arguments over tiny flecks of gold ended with throats slit, bodies dumped into shallow streams. The water carried these sins downstream, seeping them into all who drank. Texas bloomed under equally bloody stars. Settlers displaced native tribes with rifles and promises of government treaties that vanished like smoke. Range wars lit entire counties ablaze, families vanishing overnight under the cover of rifle barrels and torchlight. Men like Luther Ames, whose name local children still refuse to say after dark, turned their neighbors' skulls into grim fence toppers, warning rivals to keep their distance. So is it any wonder that the places themselves seem to remember, that floorboards sigh under invisible weight, that doors drift open with no wind to urge them, that some rooms refuse to warm no matter how fiercely the hearth burns? Maybe memory is not confined to human skulls. Maybe stone and soil clutch their stories tighter than any grave. Modern intrusions do little to cleanse these sites. On the contrary, new blood seems to invigorate old wounds. Paranormal groups that camp near ghost towns often report machinery failing, batteries draining as if some unseen hunger slurped them dry. In one instance outside Downeyville, a camera crew captured hours of uneventful footage, only to review it later and find brief flickers of figures peering from ruined windows, faces pale, eyes luminous, mouths yawning wider than jaws should allow. The footage was never broadcast, The producer reportedly developed a persistent cough that no doctor could treat, finally dying with lungs so blackened, the coroner assumed coal miner's disease, despite no history of such work. Even casual tourists stumble into these lingering traps. A couple honeymooning near Enchanted Rock in Texas hiked off trail seeking a private view of sunset. They returned at dusk, clothing torn, eyes glassy. Friends who met them later said they spoke in odd cadences, as if echoing someone else. They divorced within months. Neither would ever discuss what they saw or heard among the granite domes that evening. Yet for all the horror braided through these accounts, there is also something dreadfully seductive. Who among us hasn't felt the shiver of possibility when stepping into an old building, breathing air thick with dust and the faint iron tang of decay? Part of us craves proof that death is not an end but a threshold, even if crossing means forever trading sunlight for shadows. Why else return again and again to these sites? Ears straining for whispers that might confirm the oldest, darkest hope, that something waits beyond the veil. Film and television feed this hunger greedily.